one for extending the deadline. That was changed to read differently and was sent out to everybody. And of course, it was changed so that it reads adopt option 2 as proposed, and that would be to extend the deadline for signature gathering. And as it said, 53% of the poll results resulted in favor of extending to 60 days, and 47% extending to 45 days. So fairly evenly split on extending it, but at least we definitely decided, and that was the decision, and that's what we've got in the record now. So are there any questions about that, or questions about other aspects of the meeting summary from February 25? Okay, well, I thank everybody for taking a close look at that and making sure that the record accurately reflects the what happened in the meeting. Next is public comment, and Lorraine, you had sent me a statement to be read in the meeting, and I'm very ready to read it unless you would like to read your own statement into the record.
I would be happy to read my own statement because I've shortened it up a little bit.
Okay, well then why don't you go ahead, Lorraine, with your statement.
Okay, let me get, we have one of the best governments in the state of Colorado. And that is because of people like you who have an interest in how well we do government in our city. And I wanted to talk about just a couple of things that are very important. Number one, when we elect our council members, we, the people, speak as a majority, and it should not be easy to unseat those people unless they've committed a crime or something. And I believe that even though it was uncomfortable this time for some of the newer members to be subject of a recall, I believe that we shouldn't use recall as a way to help disgruntled people. And by the way, this particular recall was announced before the vote was even taken. So I saw that as a threat to council members that, gee, if you vote differently than we think, you're going to be recalled. So I actually believe that the recall issue worked. One of the issues is it was during the time of COVID. It may have been different if people could stand in front of a grocery store and gather signatures. Nevertheless, the people, the majority of electors elect people to sit on city council. And also for referendum, the majority of people elect everyone. And so if you go to overturn what our elected representatives vote for, and by the way, that's how our government works in the United States. I shouldn't have to tell you that. You all should know that we have representative government, and so we elect our representatives. And it should not be easy to overturn what they have done. So I believe that we have a good system in place. And I can remember when referendum was used by a council member who didn't get his way during a vote. So please be very careful. You folks are there to protect our government and um, to help us achieve good government. So that's all I wanted to say. Somebody tried to recall me and their reason was this. I didn't invite them to a neighborhood meeting. And the reason I didn't was it wasn't their neighborhood. So they were a group of people who just were disgruntled over all of the infill development going on in my district. So that's all I have to say. And thank you all for doing your job. And I hope you maintain the good government that the city of Arvada has in the whole state of Colorado. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Lorraine. I appreciate your statement. Okay, we'll move to the remaining issues then. The first of those issues is the appointment of assistant and the special counsel. I think it's accurate to say the statement of the issue is that the current practice is, and the current language indicates that if the city attorney wishes to hire outside counsel, that he requests authorization from the city council. And I think our question is whether that should continue whether it should be considered a limitation and whether that limitation on the discretion of the attorney should be removed. So, Rachel, do you want to speak more to the issue?
Sure, and I'll really defer to Ken on a lot of this, but I think from the perspective, and I'd really be curious to hear what John and Lauren have to say on this too. I went through and did some research on what other cities do related to who hires special counsel and when and for what reason. So I've got those provisions outlined in the worksheet that I sent out. There are some cities that do have a little bit more leeway for the city attorney. And I think it was Thornton that said that it was city council or the city attorney could appoint special counsel. The reason why this could potentially become an issue at some point is, if we had a case come in the door or something come up where we needed someone like, let's say, with a special expertise to go do this, and we needed to do it quickly. There are times when it takes a little bit longer to get something approved like that. I mean, that's really the flexibility that we're looking for there, or that I think is what Ken is suggesting. So those are just my 2 cents. But again, I'm interested to hear from Ken and John and Lauren as well.
Okay, and I think Ken will not be joining us for a while, at least.
Ken's on.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay, I'm sorry, did not see you.
So Ken, you're the lawyer, and John, you've been on council just a little bit longer than I have, so I'm going to let you two go first while I collect my thoughts on this.
Why don't you go ahead, Ken?
All right, thanks. Mark, you probably didn't see it. I just sent you a note, but just for everybody else, I've got a conflict tonight in that I have 2 meetings scheduled at guess what time? 6 to 8. And I had previously told Mark I was going to miss the beginning of this meeting because I was absolutely needed at the other place. They changed their agenda. So imagine my surprise. I said, okay, I'm leaving you guys. I'm going to Arvada. I'll be back. So you've got me for at least till about 7. Okay. So here was my thought. And full disclosure for some of the folks who don't know me, I do legal work and I work with local governments. And I worked with Arvada before I was ever an Arvada official, and I have worked with Arvada since no longer being an elected official. There are times when city attorneys, through their own internal communications on the listservs, have the need for special expertise, and that my field is one of those areas, but there are others: water law, bond counsel, eminent domain counsel. Sometimes there's a need for litigation counsel because the city attorney's office has an internal conflict of interest. And in those cases, in some communities, the city attorney has the authorization within her or his budget to hire outside counsel. And if they're going to need more than that, then they have to go back to the council. But they just can go out and do that. And they usually know who they like to use on those issues because they're generally recurring issues. And in cases where they don't, they reach out to their colleagues who are other city attorneys and get recommendations. It just becomes a lot easier to do that when the city attorney has that authority. In other cases, there are some cities that require city council to get involved every time the city attorney wants to hire outside assistance on a project, an individual project basis. And it's just, to me, it seemed like a layer of bureaucracy that is not necessary. In some communities where there have been historical problems between elected officials and city staff, it probably makes sense to have that. We've been really, really fortunate for many, many years in Arvada to not have those kinds of problems. So, you know, I've seen this from both sides of the dais, and it just seems to me to be an issue that we've never needed really here before. And frankly, I can't even tell you that, to the best of my recollection, that every single time the city of Arvada has asked for my help on an issue, it's actually gone to council. I'm sure it probably did, but I sure don't remember it happening that way. So that was my thought in bringing up the issue for consideration.
Okay. And John Marriott?
Yeah, so I actually have a couple questions that I'd like to ask Rachel Morris before I kind of weigh in here. So, Rachel, the question I have is, if we were going to hire special counsel, and I say we, I mean the city of Arvada, we're going to hire special counsels through your office or not, does that require the notification requirements plus then action at a public meeting, or is that something that can be done in an executive session where the notice or without notice requirements? So in other words, the speed at which it can be done, are we locked into some window of time?
So the way that we've historically handled it, and I've done it the same way that Chris always did, which is a little bit more informal than that. We have those discussions and really notification to city council, and then those occasional, we do the reporting on the expenditures and what case we do them for. So we keep you guys informed and we notify you of it, and then talk with you about, all right, is this one that you really want to weigh in on? So we've done the quote unquote approval in a much more informal way. Okay,
and then the second question I would have is, you know, the city council has, I believe by ordinance, given the city manager spending authority up to a certain amount, and we can of course repeal and replace that ordinance or amend that ordinance anytime we want for whatever reason we want. Is it possible to accomplish the same thing in that same way? So rather than a voter-approved charter change, is it possible that the city council could, for instance, adopt an ordinance allowing the city attorney to hire special counsel up to a certain dollar amount or for only certain purposes, you know, whatever limitation council might want to put on?
You could clarify, what we mean by approval for city council and do something similar to that. Right now, our purchasing ordinance has agreements with outside counsel exempted. So they're not required to go through that same RFP purchasing process, that kind of thing. For some of the reasons that Ken has outlined, you know, we know who's going to do a really great job on this, and we don't do that. But we could clarify it even further to, clarify the intent or how we're interpreting that particular provision.
Yeah, I guess my thought is, this is on our list here because there's a prohibition of it in the charter, correct?
It says that city council may provide the city attorney such assistance as city council may deem necessary, and that it may, on its own motion or upon request of the city attorney in special cases, employ special counsel. So what's meant by that is, that's I think what Ken is getting at, is where do we go from that, and how do we also, there's a thing at the end talking about agreements for compensation being approved.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess my my just plain language look at that means that the city council has to approve any hiring of special counsel, and of course we have to approve the expenditure of that. That rather than change the charter to say something else, would it be possible for the council to pass an ordinance allowing the city attorney to hire special counsel, on their own, with some cap or limitation on expenditure without getting specific council approval first? So I guess the question I'm just asking, and to Ken, I think Ken makes a good point, and I think from a workability standpoint about not having a long drawn out process to be able to do that, I think that makes lots of sense. I think that there's lots of logic there. My question really is more around, is there a better way of doing it without amending the charter?
Sure.
Which obviously we have an unsure outcome of asking for charter amendments.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, and I think we probably could, in that you can delegate authority. So that's how we would look at it as, and we're about to we're working on amendments to our purchasing ordinance right now. So this would be something easy that we could kind of roll up into that and say, okay, to the extent, we need to approve these agreements, we're delegating that authority up to these amounts or within this budget or something like that. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to hear what other people have to say about it as well. Thank you.
So I actually really appreciate getting all of that from particularly John's questions and then the extra from Ken. I really like where John was taking this about keeping a city council. One of my biggest concerns, and why I wanted to hear a little bit more, is that when people hear the term special counsel, they think about the United States Justice Department, and they think about investigations perhaps of city council or something like that. And I'm a little worried about how we word a voter amendment that is both clear and direct and helps people break that preconceived notion when they see that term special counsel. And so plus with all the things we're going to be referring to the voters as is, I'm wondering if this isn't better as one that we can take care of behind the scenes, as opposed to making it one more ballot initiative amongst many others.
Yep. I think that's perfect. And that's an excellent point, too, about special counsel. The way that we think of it is, at least internally at the city, the way I've always thought of it is, when I need an attorney that for work that I don't have capacity for internally, or that I don't have expertise for internally, that's kind of how I conceptualize that. But that's true. It's used in different contexts, and so there could be different meanings to it. I also, Ed's comment in the chat, I think, is a really, really good one. Can council pre-approve every year? So some government entities do that by creating what they call panel counsel. So they have one mass approval of a list of attorneys that can be used by a certain government entity at a particular rate, and then they just have that at the beginning of every year. So that's another option too. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Okay, let me read into the record a statement that Lorraine sent, but she did not, she said she shortened her statement. But in the last of the written statement she had given me earlier, she said, concerning the city manager, the city attorney, increased ability to act without the council action. We've been blessed in the city for many years with outstanding leadership from our city managers and our city attorneys. This was not always the case. We've had city managers and city attorneys who are not doing a good job, and you don't want to give away the power to regulate their actions. Are there any other, anybody else who wants to weigh in on this?
Mark, can I circle back on John Marriott's comments?
Yeah, please do.
I appreciate John's perspective, and I like it. And I when Rachel was describing how she and the prior city attorney have done this, it kind of refreshed my memory a little bit, and probably discloses the fact that I was not up to speed on the exact provision in the charter when I served on city council. Because I think, I mean, if we read it literally, if you need the council to act, either to approve something Rachel would ask you for, or to act on its own motion, that requires a motion, and that requires a public meeting and not an executive session. But that's the way that we've done it for a long time. And I do think that a formal action by the council in a motion to give the city attorney a certain range of authority to use her discretion up to a certain point, which can be revoked at any time, so it addresses the issue that Lorraine just raised, and it avoids having to make this a charter change. I withdraw my suggestion that we make this a charter change, and I think that allows basically us to continue the practice that we've been doing anyway, but actually does it in a way that's more consistent with what the charter says.
Okay, any other thoughts on this?
Mark?
Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
I really like the comment that Lorraine made that you're never sure. And we've had great attorneys and managers and others not so much. So I like the direction of doing it outside of a charter change. To do it within a charter change, I think confuses the people and confuses the issue.
Okay. There seems to be some agreement, at least by those who have spoken, that this could be dealt with outside of the charter through the purchasing ordinance or through, some other internal measure. Somebody's got a hand up here, but all I see is the telephone number. So
that's me, Mark.
Oh, that's you. Okay.
Yeah. Apparently, they weren't able to change my name this time from a number, or change it from number to name.
Okay. Well, your hand.
But yes, I agree.
My screen. Your hand appears at the top of my screen, and your name appears at the bottom of my screen. That's why I was confused. Okay. Oh. Okay. Would there be any objection then to just say, report back to council that we think this is something that they should address, but outside of the charter language?
Mark, I asked Lisa if she could do a poll like she did during our last meeting so that we have it on the record.
Okay, let's do, I'm good with the poll.
All right, I'm on it. What are the options we want to put? Appointment of, go ahead.
I guess the options would be on this is to recommend a change in charter language or resolve the issue outside of the charter.
So should I put through all right, I'll just put outside the charter.
Yeah.
Okay. Creating the poll. So I'm going to drop it in the chat.
It did come with toy.
That should be the poll in the chat box to vote. And I think you wanted the numbers, right? Not the percent, Mark?
Yes, let's have the numbers. You can convert it to percent later, but let's do the numbers.
Okay, so you should be able to. Good. It looks like 100% is outside charter.
Okay, sounds good. It takes care of that one. Thank you.
Just for the record, it's only about 15 responding. So I don't know. Do you want me to wait till everyone is in or majority?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
We'll go with that. Okay, our next item is 6.5, the expanding the non-interference clause. And I'll ask Rachel to speak to this, but basically what we're saying is we have definitely in the charter the language that the city council should not interfere. We have that section related to the city manager, but we do not have it related to our other appointees. Is that stated correctly, Rachel?
Yes, I believe so. This was the other half of Ken Fellman's suggestion related to the charter. So I went through and I pulled a bunch of other non-interference clauses from other organizations and listed those out. Only one of the 5 that we typically look at has a provision like that, that it encompasses, it wraps up all of the appointees. So it creates the same non-interference rule for all of the appointees. And I just want to be clear too, I don't think I have a current problem with this at all. I think council members, as every single one of them, are very, very respectful of, you know, the work that we do, and they're not trying to, you know, they're not calling people who work for me directly and giving them direction or anything like that. So I don't think we have a current issue. But this was just an issue that was raised, so I listed all of those various options. Most jurisdictions have a non-interference clause that relates to the city manager only.
Mhm. Okay, Ken, are you still here?
Yes,
Yeah,
I am.
Did you want to speak to that?
You know, I raised it just to throw it out there for staff to look at. If Rachel is comfortable with the status quo, I'm comfortable moving on. Unless anybody else wants to jump on it and have further discussion.
I would say from my perspective of the years on the council, it seemed to me that every council member, although every council member took that in the spirit that it's meant that there was non-interference with any of the 3 appointees, the staff of any of the 3 appointees. So I have not encountered a problem, but it is true that we've only got it mentioned in the case of the city manager, but I never ran into a problem with it, and I don't think we would expect any if we don't change any language. So,
Mark, can I just add?
yeah,
I
please.
think part of that may be also related to the city manager has hiring authority for all city employees. I'm not sure that, but that would make sense to me how this wound up
And they
that
have
way.
The city manager also has a much broader scope of employees that they manage. So out of our 700 full-time, part-time employees, I have 15, and the municipal court judge has about that many. And then the remaining, 670 employees are underneath the city manager. So they're managing a larger portion of the city.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else wants to speak to this one? Okay, Lisa, are you ready to do a poll? I guess,
So no change versus,
yeah.
what's the other one?
Yeah, just change the charter language or no change of charter language.
All right, simple enough. Okay, it's in the chat. These polls are a lot easier, thank you. Okay, it looks like we're at about 100% again.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I went into the chat box and I'm coming back out and I'm not finding the Zoom again, so I may have to do something different here.
Hey, Mark, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, please.
I'm slowed to the draw tonight. I have not been able to get my computer to let me vote once. Can we just get a quick count of who is eligible to vote? So Lisa, so we can know how many people are not registering their votes, just in case things get tight and contentious later. You never know.
Well, I don't expect contention since,
Never contentious, never.
well, it's just simply because we're making recommendations, we're not making decisions. That'd be fine. That'd be fine. No problem. So you want to say it again, Katie, that just asking about
How many people are I see there's about 29 people on the call, but Lisa probably needs a number of how many people should be voting each time.
So how many people are on the committee minus who's not here is the question.
Barb, can you give us the number of participants who are present this evening?
I believe, let's see here, 1, 2, 3. 17.
Okay.
Well, 21 here, and if we take off Lori Gillis, me, Rachel, we're not going to include you, correct, Mark?
Right.
And
So
Kristen.
14.
Okay.
Well, so we have 12 and 13 on both of the votes. So
Okay.
we got one slacker.
Well, Lauren and John, are you voting? Okay, so 16.
Okay, so we've got the numbers there. Okay, let's take a look at 6.1, 8.1, 8.1, and 8.2, which have to do with the residency requirements. And I think our question there is just simply as happens usually with documents of this kind, they get created a little bit at a time. So we have residency requirements for the city manager, but we do not for the city attorney. And again, we do have for the municipal judge. So do you want to speak to this one again, Rachel?
Yeah, I can do that. So this one I believe was raised by Katie Winner. So Katie will probably I'll have you talk about, the reasoning behind it and all of that. And I'll just tell you what I found from my research. So when I looked at it, we have a provision in the charter requiring residency for the city manager and for the municipal court judge. Those two provisions read a little bit differently. So I think, making them read similarly would be good. There is no residency requirement in the charter for the city attorney, but I have no objection to one being included if that's what the committee wants to recommend. So I am required by contract to live within city limits. And I think that's been the case for at least for me and for Chris Daly, who was in my position for 24 years, I think, for me. So the residency has been required, just not in the charter. So then when I looked at other charters in the area, the only one that I didn't find a residency requirement for the city manager in was Boulder. And then the other 4 that I looked at did have a residency requirement for the city manager. I couldn't find any residency requirements for the city attorney in other jurisdictions. And then we had already looked at the municipal court judge residency requirements. And again, the 5 that I typically look at, I didn't find a residency requirement for the municipal court judge, but there are other jurisdictions that require in some form or fashion that the municipal court judge be a resident of the city. So Katie, I'll hand it off to you to kind of talk through some of your thought process related to this request.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's really quite simple. I think our founding documents had it right when they put in a residency requirement. I was wondering if this committee wanted to entertain the idea that that requirement should be uniform across those 3 positions, city attorney, city manager, and judge, and make it the same for all, which I think we talked in this committee about the ability to recruit and look for candidates who do not live in Arvada and give them, I think it was a 6-month to 12-month window to establish residency in Arvada. So that's the basis of what I was thinking was 3 people chosen by council, allowing for recruitment outside of city limits and asking them to establish residency within a year's time frame. Now, here's the catch that I didn't think about until the other day when I was talking with David Jones. what do we do about areas of inside of the city limits that are unincorporated? So the question is, not to get sticky and tricky, but there are parcels that are technically inside the city limits of Arvada, but are technically unincorporated Jefferson County. So they don't pay taxes to the city. They don't get their water from the city. They are unencumbered by any of our ordinances, policies, city policies. That's my understanding. That's why they are unincorporated, but they are literally pockets spread all throughout Arvada and Davis County. Thanks, Sharon. You're absolutely correct. So there's two parts, unfortunately, now, Rachel, and I don't know if I want to bring it forward. The first is, should we allow recruitment outside and then residency? And then what is residency? Or Rachel, maybe you can speak to, is it already addressed in the charter or in your contract? I just wanted to levy the question.
So the second piece of the question being what happens with those unincorporated pockets. So I think if it's not incorporated into the city of Arvada, if it hasn't been annexed into the city of Arvada, then the charter provisions would prohibit having an appointee live in that particular location. So it's a choice, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about before when it comes to the municipal court judge, when we were talking about their residency requirement. Is it important? Does the committee feel that it's important to have someone who lives inside city limits, who's paying taxes to the city, all that kind of stuff, serving in these particular positions? So that's I think what you would be discussing.
Well, wouldn't it be the case that since we have a residency requirement for the city manager, we have a residency requirement for the municipal presiding municipal court judge, we're really just saying, should we have a residency requirement for the city attorney? Then whether we would recommend tweaking that for the time or whatever, but seems like a basic question is, should there be a residency requirement for the city attorney? So anybody have thoughts on this one, on that question?
So just for clarification, Kitty, are you saying that it should just be uniform across, or do you want them to actually live in the city limits that are incorporated? So for example, they wouldn't be able to live in unincorporated Jefferson County or unincorporated Adams County, the parts, or just parts of the city that's in unincorporated areas? Or is the question, which I thought was in my mind, was the question, should the city manager, muni judge, and city attorney, should that language all look uniform in the same? As the city attorney by contract and the city manager and the muni judge are differentiated. So I guess maybe that's where I need clarification on.
See, to my mind, there really are two separate questions. The first one being, since we have the residency requirement for two of the three appointees, to my mind, the first question is, should we extend a residency requirement? Should we have a residency requirement for the city attorney? If the answer to that one is in the affirmative, then we might talk about whether it should be consistent across all three. So, is there a comment concerning the first question? Should the city attorney be required to be a resident of the city of Arvada?
So the part of my brain that really likes things to be organized inside of neat boxes says yes, because I like having things consistent, the same requirement for all the appointees. That said, and I truly open this up to the group for feedback because it's a genuine question in my mind. I'm wondering, given the sensitive nature of the attorney position, if it perhaps is almost beneficial that somebody lives outside of the city because they don't have the same network of friends and everything, and they can be a little more judicious, I guess. But then that would also, I guess, go over to the judge position as well. So I'd love to hear some additional thoughts from the group on that.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we're getting so we can go forward.
I think, Vanessa, why don't you go ahead? Oh,
Thank you. My question is probably best to go first because I feel really naive here. I'm going to need a little justification as to why any of these positions really need to have a residency requirement. I just don't understand the importance of that. And I'm a real estate agent, so I benefit a little if you guys want to send these people over my way when they need to move to Arvada, but it's expensive and, you know, inhibiting. And I just don't understand why it's so important that any of them have to have residency. So I need a little educating on this one.
okay. Let's see if we
I
have
have
an
that same, I have that same question that when we first brought that up too about the city attorney. Why do they have to live in the city? Like I said, having worked for other municipalities, that was not a requirement. And actually, again, much to what Lauren was saying, they did that on purpose to discourage cronyism. So
no, let me back up just a little bit. There's not a recommendation. There is no residency requirement for the attorney at present. We just had the question raised whether there ought to be, and that's what we're looking at. So why or why not? John Marriott, you had something earlier. You're still ready to?
You know, I did, and I'll weigh in a minute, but I think a lot of people have raised their hands, so I'd like to hear what they have to say. Thank you.
And
Okay.
Lindsay has her hand up as well. She's had it for a little bit.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I didn't.
Sorry, did you call on me? No, I didn't hear
Yep,
you.
Lindsay, you're
Oh,
good. Go.
okay. Sorry, I didn't want to jump anyone. I think I understand where a lot of people are coming from wanting to keep the attorney in Arvada, but I think you're limiting your options. And I think by doing that, you know, you could get a really great applicant from outside Arvada, but that can't even be considered. So that's just kind of where, when I was thinking of this issue, where I was coming from. So I just wanted to provide that input. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Ken Feldman.
Thanks, Mark. So having lived through some city manager residency controversy, I do think with the manager, you want to have the person who is the leading advocate for carrying out the council's policies be an active member of the community and live within that community, because otherwise, you know, they're out there showing up at whether it's a Kiwanis meeting or a chamber meeting or a Boy Scout troop or Girl Scout troop meeting, and there's just a, well, this person isn't really part of our community. They just come to work here during the day. And so I think there are really good policy reasons to have that requirement for the manager. There are similar good reasons, but not as strong for the city attorney. And I've always been comfortable leaving it up to the council to decide whether the council wants to make that a contractual obligation for the city attorney that they are hiring. And I think there's even less reason to have it for a judge. A judge, by their nature and the code of judicial ethics that they have to follow, are not going to be involved in a whole bunch of different community activities, certainly none that involve any kind of politics. And a lot of our activities, even those that really aren't by nature political, have some elements of politics to them, and smart judges stay away from those kinds of activities. And you know, something that Katie had said earlier about, well, giving them time to move in, there are fewer members of the legal community who want to be judges and who are qualified to be judges. And you know, you get somebody who may live 2 or 3 towns over and would be happy to come to work here every day, but has small kids in school or kids in school, kids of any size in school, and don't want to uproot their family and change schools, even though Vanessa could use a couple more sales this month. I just think if that's the best candidate for your municipal judge, then that's who you go get, and you don't limit the pool of qualified judges based upon only people who are willing to uproot their families and move them to a new town to work. So I'm comfortable keeping the way it is and leaving it up to the council's discretion when they enter into contracts with their attorney and with their judge as to whether that's important to that council at that point in time.
Okay, Shelley Cook.
Thanks, Mark. My cat's kind of activist here, so if you hear him in the background, forgive me. So I agree with Ken. By far the most important spot is the manager, and he stated it well. You want somebody who's going to go to the kite festival and run into residents at the grocery store, as Lorraine has pointed out, and be invested in the community through probably home ownership and so forth. So I really think that adds a depth to their performance that they may not have otherwise. To a lesser extent, you gain some of the same benefit if you apply that to your other two appointees. So for example, if one of them is involved in a program to address recidivism, or they've come to realize that the need for a probationary program, I think that come up earlier. And to the extent that they are part and parcel of the community, it may mean that they recognize those needs more. But I agree with the idea that the most important is with the manager, and you wouldn't want to let that go. Some communities require department heads, police chief, et cetera, to be a member or to live in the city as well. So anyway, that's all I have right now.
Okay, thanks. Brett, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Mark. And I agree with Lauren in the way my mind is organized. If I have three appointees, I want them all to be governed by the same kind of requirements. But I also agree with others who pointed out that the influence isn't the same. I think it's very important that the city manager be a resident and be exposed to the heart, the soul, the heartbeat of the city. I see that to be less important with the municipal judge, but still somewhat important, and even less important with the city attorney. I agree with expanding, keeping the talent pool as wide as possible, and perhaps not losing a qualified applicant simply because they're not able to relocate to the city of Arvada. It's my 2 cents.
Okay. Bob Dyer.
Yeah, I've been involved in a number of those things as well, with city managers and city attorneys, municipal judge hires. I think leaving it to the discretion of the council, except for maybe the city manager, I think the city manager has to live in the city, especially when you're going to get a big snowstorm. I think the city manager needs to be there when the snow hits. For city attorney, I think you leave it to the discretion of the city council. If they want to hire somebody that lives 8 miles away, that's one thing. But if it's somebody that lives in Berthoud or Fort Collins, and they have questions about how they're going to be able to be in the office on a daily basis, well, that's something they need to resolve. It is just a matter of the city council deciding if it works. I would rather not change things, and I would rather not require the judge to have to live in the city, as long as the council has discretion to require it in a contract.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, if the discussion.
Mark?
Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
I just wanted to say, and I can't say I necessarily agree with this, I've talked to a lot of people who feel it's very important for all 3 appointees to live in the city, and they base that feeling on the fact that they understand the city's issues, the things that go on by being a part of the city. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but I do think they have a good point, that especially for the judge, because the judge will be a lot closer to the local community if he lives here. So I think there is a point to be made. Frankly, after listening to this discussion, my personal view is that we don't make any changes and leave it to the discretion of the council to require it by contract.
So I agree with Nancy's point about that feeling of knowing the community. Okay, thank you, Tabby. My little girl's with me tonight, you guys. So, but my big concern, particularly with the judge, and I know this has already happened with our current judge, is they get a case and they're already familiar with it because of the community gossip. Now, we're wonderful. We have an amazing judge who's able to disassociate herself and perform her duties, but nonetheless, it's still something that you have to be mindful of as your city. Ideally, justice is completely blind, and if this is why we pick juries who are unfamiliar with cases and haven't heard of them before. And so I'm leaning towards, as I said in the chat, I don't think it's necessary for the city attorney, and I'm leaning towards actually removing it for the judge for this reason. But I agree with the excellent points made that we need to keep it for the city attorney. And I will be right back.
Okay. Vanessa Kendrick.
I just wanted to point out and maybe play
That
devil's
was
advocate.
great.
And maybe play devil's advocate that the current director of AIDA is not a resident of the city, and the current president of the Arvada Chamber of Commerce is not a resident. And I can speak to the Chamber of Commerce president. She's phenomenal and knows this city and loves this city better than like any other leader I've ever met, and has done an amazing job for this city. And she's not a resident. So I'm just throwing that out there as far as how intimately aware we truly need to be. Do we truly need to shop at the grocery store to be intimate with the community? And I would argue in those two cases, not. But I can see certainly from the city manager, I can definitely be convinced that that is a position that is best suited to be a resident. I'm not so sure I can get there with the other two using that argument.
Okay, at this point, the language is in the charter that requires the city manager to be a resident, and there's been nothing stated that suggests that would suggest there would be a change in that requirement. We have the requirement that the municipal judge be a resident, and all the other judges of the court. I think that's a question that we might address before we go back to think about the attorney and think about consistency. So basically, I guess a question that I would throw out to the group is, should we maintain the requirement for each judge of the municipal court be a resident of the city, or would there be any support for removing that requirement? And before we get to that question, Bob Dyer has a statement.
I don't think we should require every judge, all the fill-in judges, and I'm not sure we really need to have the municipal judge. But from a political point of view, I suspect you won't get it passed if you put it to the voters. I think you could get a requirement to require the city attorney to be there if you put it to the voters, but getting that passed to remove it for the judges, I think may be a bigger problem, unless people are willing to step up and explain why it would be a reasonable idea.
Okay, and I would just, in response to that, to say, at this point, of course, that will be what the council will decide when they get to that point, to say, is this an issue worthy of putting on the ballot? And then secondly, do we think we could get support for the change? But, at this point, we just need to give them our thoughts on the issue, and they'll make that kind of determination, because I think that's a crucial question. And of course, the council will be looking at that. So if we could do a polling on it's first on the municipal court judge, and really it's each judge of the municipal court should be a resident. So the question is, Lisa, to maintain the residency requirement for the judge, or recommend removing the requirement of residency?
Okay, so you don't want me to add the 6-month or 12-month option, just,
No,
okay.
no, just the residency at this point, without any of the other things. That part can come later.
All right, making the poll. All right, drop the poll link in there. So remind me, we're about 17. We need 17 votes. If everyone is there, okay. Yeah, I think Ken might either be refilling his glass or in the bathroom. Ken, we're voting, so it's in the link, or it's in the chat. All right, so far we got 69% for doesn't have to be a resident.
And what's that number? 69% equates to
9, so it looks like the number is 9 for not being a resident and 4 right now current resident.
Okay, so so 9 would be,
I'm sorry, it's 11 right now for doesn't have to be a resident, and 4 for current resident. Has to be
okay.
a current resident.
So if we follow that, our recommendation to the council would be remove the residency requirement for the judge, and basically this language for each judge of the municipal court. Okay, and then since we wanted to make these to take a look at all three, maybe we can have a poll to say, should there be a residency requirement for the city attorney? So if we can put that up for a poll too.
So I'll just have a yes, no option for that.
Yes, yeah, that'd be fine. Yes, no option for residency for the city attorney.
Okay, so drop the link, and that's for residency requirement for city attorney, yes, no. All right, live updates. So we got 62%, which the number would be 8 for no for residency requirement, 5 for yes.
Okay.
Now we're at 9 for no, 5 for yes.
Okay, so again, that would be the recommendation that it not change, that there not be a residency requirement instituted.
Now,
Okay.
Rachel, it's important to remember that this has got to go to the voters. You can't start looking for houses in Cherry Creek just yet.
Nor would I. Last time I moved, I swore it would be the last time. It's too much work.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you. I think it's a really good discussion on that. And when the report is made to the council, besides the report from John Marriott and Lauren Simpson, our report will encompass some of the discussion that occurred this evening. And okay, so then we can take a look at, yes, I'm sorry.
You missed two, it's okay. You missed two really nice comments in the chat that Ed Rothschild and Shelley Cook made. Pursuant to Rachel, you said it was not required, but it was written into your contract. I'm confused on that, but if everyone could take a look at what Ed and Shelley said in the comments, maybe we could add these caveats to Shelley. Shelley and Ed, do you want to speak to your points? I just wanted to make sure those were lifted before we moved on.
Well, I think that there is some acknowledgement of it being desirable when it's feasible for our appointees to live in the city, but having it handled as it is currently with the city attorney leaves a little bit of a safety valve. So if there's somebody who's just a really good applicant, you can negotiate around that with the contract, and just sending that as sort of a a signing note with our recommendations to the council that we respected what they have done in the past when it hasn't been a requirement, and that's something that they may want to consider going forward if this passes. I mean, if they in fact take our recommendation not to make these a requirement. So yeah.
Okay.
My comment, Mark, was really aimed at consistency's sake.
Yeah.
So right now we have 3 different language. You could get it down to 2 by at least. You could change the language for 8.1 and 8.2 to be not required but preferred.
Okay, Rachel might want to speak to that, but I don't think we would put preferences into the charter language.
So my thought would be on this, Ed, if the consensus of the group is that they want to remove the residency requirement for the judge, then assuming that passed with the voters, then there would be nothing to make consistent. And so if we're recommending to council, if the committee is recommending to council to remove that provision entirely, there would be no reason for the change to make it consistent.
Then we would
I
have.
would add is going back to the comment about politics of getting it passed. The change that I'm recommending might make that easier.
Mm-hmm. We could vote on that Mark, if you wanna do that.
Frame the question for me. I'm not sure, because if we were recommending doing away with the residency requirement for the judge, and we're recommending that none be instated for the city attorney, the only thing we have to be consistent with is the city manager, and that's singular by its nature. So I'm not sure what their consistency would be.
So Ed, are you saying that maybe if we put the residency not required but preferred in the municipal judge provision, that it might make that easier to pass?
Correct. I'm going back to, I think, Bob Dyer's comment, or whoever made it, about getting it through the vote.
Okay.
Okay, so Rachel, you'll capture that language, preferred. I still, it gives me some pause to put a preference into a charter, which basically a document that says thou shalt or thou shalt not. And then this would be, I believe, the only provision, if it were put forward that way and approved, I think it would be the only provision that would have a preference stated.
I can't remember for certain. There may be some provisions. If we look back at that worksheet, I think there may have been another jurisdiction who said that. And I want to say it was Broomfield.
It is, because that's where I saw it.
Yeah.
They used if practicable.
Mm-hmm.
Practicable, right. I think that's, yeah.
I really like this particular thing, Ed, because oftentimes with hiring decisions, even if it's not a direct point system, it kind of comes down. I like that this candidate did this. I like that you're checking boxes. So it makes it one box that could help get an applicant advanced, but it does not eliminate other potentially more qualified applicants from getting themselves into the mix and then winning it, whoever wins on the interview rounds. So I like that language, and I agree it could make it more palatable to the voters.
Okay, and Nancy, you want to weigh in on this? Nancy Young, I see a hand up. Are you there, Nancy? Okay, I guess not. Okay, we'll go to the section 4.7, term limits, which is, get that document here. Here we go. We've got the language that currently somebody who's eligible to be elected to the council office no more than 3 terms, but it doesn't preclude them from running for separate offices after the finish of 3 terms. And the thoughts put forward in our previous meeting is that we might have some other limitation on it. So do you want to speak to that, Rachel?
Yep, I can do that. Thankfully on this one, there's actually a chart that the Colorado Municipal League put together that talks about how other jurisdictions handle this.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we've got that chart and I sent that to you guys for your review. Basically on the pros and cons, I just tried to capture what we had talked about in our last meeting related to this topic, and then kind of outline where the 5 cities that were closest to sit, but also provided the chart so you can see across Colorado how other jurisdictions have handled term limits. So Nancy, I think this one was yours, right? Do you want to speak to this?
Are you there, Nancy?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Mark, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm having a terrible time. Zoom keeps muting me. Yes, I do want to speak to term limits. And my big concern is under the current charter, one person can literally serve a lifetime on the city council. Don Allard, I believe, served on council for something like 32 or 36 years. The current mayor has been a member of council for 24 years. And it's not that I have anything against either of them, but the fact is cities grow and change. The people who live here fluctuate. There are different viewpoints today, and it seems to me that there needs to be some limitation on individuals as to how many years they can serve. My original proposal was to limit one person to up to 4 terms in office. That would be 16 years. One of the things, by the way, in the chart that Rachel sent out that I found totally fascinating is that it's really the city of Boulder. And the city of Boulder, back in 1999, did away with term limits. And then in 2016, I believe it was, they put in term limits of 4 years. So I think what that's saying is their experience with no term limits was not satisfactory to the people. And I don't think our current system is satisfactory. I do believe we need to have new faces. We need more turnover. We need people with new ideas who are looking at the world differently than you or I or Lorraine or, you know, us oldsters, if I can put it that way. And to make room for fresh faces, you need to have room on the council.
Okay. Others who wish to speak to this? While I wait for anybody else to weigh in.
I'd like to make
comment, actually. I think it's up to the voters as to whom they want to vote for. And that's why we have elections. So having term limits isn't, I personally feel that if they're doing a great job, then the people will continue to vote for that person. That's just how I see it. Let the voters make that choice.
Okay.
Mark?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just like to respond to that. Well,
Nancy,
hello?
Nancy, can we wait and get a couple other comments, and maybe you can respond to more than one at a time?
Okay, I'm sorry.
I just don't want to enter into where it's just a dialogue. So,
fine.
Are there other other
I
comments?
will pop in real quick. My understanding is that a current council member can serve up to 12 years in a district seat, 12 years in an at-large seat, and then 12 years in a mayor's seat. So up to 36 years, potentially even longer if they were to switch districts and do different district seats. Now, I also understand that no one has ever actually done it. We've had a small handful of people who have gone potentially 30 years or just over. No one's ever actually done the full 36 years. However, that is a very long time on city council. I do appreciate the idea of having term limits. A perfect example for Mr. Chair and Miss Vice Chair here, Mark and I, that I never, ever would have challenged Mark McGough. I never would have run for this seat if he were staying in it, because to the previous commenter's point, he was doing a great job. As long as Mark wanted the seat, I never would have considered it. It was only when it became open did I think about stepping up and trying my hand to serve the community in this way. So I do think it is a good idea to have term limits. And I like the idea of revisiting, because 36 years does seem a very long time. And I look forward to hearing the group's feedback on this. But I will say, I do think term limits certainly serve a necessary role. You don't want them to be too restrictive, but you don't want them to be too lax either. And I think the question before us, to Nancy's point, is, are they too lax right now? Or do we feel they're just right? And so I would love to hear the group's feedback on this one.
Okay, John Marriott, let's get you in here on this one.
Okay, thank you. So a couple thoughts. So the way I read the charter is that you're prohibited from serving any more than 3 consecutive terms in an office, but you could switch to a different seat, whether that be from council to mayor or district to at large, and you could even switch back. So I don't think there's any lifetime limitation on the number of terms you could serve. It's just consecutive terms in any one position. So just to be clear, I think that's what it is. So here's what I think. I think that a couple of things. One is, I think we've got it right, because one, I believe, like Anna said, that the voters have the ultimate term limiting power in every single election. That said, there is some advantage to incumbency in municipal elections, particularly. And so, you know, there's some balance probably warranted there. But I can tell you this, and, you know, I think Lauren would agree with this, that as a member of the community and with varying backgrounds, we become effective as council members not on the first day. You become effective a little bit down the road, and the more experience you get, the more effective you are. And think about any job you do, whether it's Vanessa as a realtor or you know, Ed as a small business person, me as a small business person. As I gained experience, I got better. And it's a shame to have people spend 3 or 4 years gaining experience and then being on the way out immediately after. Where I think 3 terms strikes a balance there. The other thing about our particular term limitation that I think we have exactly right, and that is the ability to move from a council seat to a mayor's seat. You know, the mayor's job in Arvada is a big job now, much bigger than it was in the 80s. You know, Arvada's twice the size it was in the 80s, and it's really twice the job. And I think having some experience, or at least having people who are experienced being able to run for that seat, I think is important. I think it's also important that somebody who had no experience can also run for that seat and may very well win. And I think that's okay too. But I wouldn't want to take people who are probably have experience and are qualified who wish to run for mayor and limit them because they've already served some time on council. So for me, I wouldn't change this at all. I understand what Nancy's saying, but I also, the voters can change it, can term limit any one of us in any election that we're up in. And I think that's the safety valve there. So I would advocate for leaving it the way it is. I think it's one of the things Arvada has very right.
I'd like to insert some information here. I went back and did a little research on council.
Do me a favor. Go round up glasses.
Okay. I went back and looked at the council incumbency since 1991. We have had a total of 20 different people who have served on council since 1991. So that's in 30 years. There have been 20 different individuals, either because an incumbent was defeated, decided not to run again, was term limited, whatever, but 20 people in 30 years. There have been 6 and maybe 7, I didn't go back and verify the 7th one, of incumbents losing to a challenger. So it's not been a locked in deal to be an incumbent. That those who have come fresh off the blocks have ousted an incumbent 6 or 7 times in the last 30 years. So just some information. Bob Dyer.
Thanks, Mark. Well, okay, a little back to history thing. Yep. Actually, I have run twice against incumbents and defeated them. And I've lost once as an incumbent. So I guess I have perspective from both sides of the street. And one thing I guess I'd point out, the 2 times I won, which we'll get to something, maybe we'll get here to tonight, I don't know. Both times I won as a challenger to an incumbent, I did not win the majority of the votes. I won a plurality. And that's because the first time, well, there were 3 candidates, and the second time there were 4 candidates. And that kind of gets back to what I was talking about as far as whether we have runoffs or other ways of deciding a position when there's more than 2 candidates. I think that incumbency can have advantages, but and this kind of, I don't even want to get into the politics of the point of view because it gets into free speech and the Supreme Court has spoken to it. But in my experience, money talks more than incumbency. And I think that that's something, we need to understand. Somebody that's willing to spend enough money can easily win a seat, even if they're not an incumbent. And whether it's their own money or they can raise it, that's a whole different subject. But money is just, or maybe even more important than the power of incumbency. But that's not something we can regulate.
Okay, thank you. Katie Winter.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, Bob Dyer. Looking at you down here. You're on my corner. I just wanted to make a comment about, I've heard so often down at the Capitol, there's so much lamenting between leaving those seats, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge and history. And I think something that Arvada has gotten right is our terms. I think that it's something that, look here tonight, Mark McGough, I don't know what this council would be, this committee would be like without your knowledge and history. And I can't speak to Don Allard. I wasn't here for his years of service, but I think as things have evolved over time, I just want to counter to Bob. Bob, it's people over money all day long sometimes. And in today's modern world of elections with text messaging and sophistication in systems, a very strong grassroots campaign has been proven in Colorado to beat money sometimes. And that is something that goes to the art and the science of elections, which you're right, we cannot
control. On that someday. What if I'm not? We'll see about it.
Absolutely, sir. But I just wanted to say, I think that, I hear Nancy's point, and we're going to talk in the future about ranked choice voting, which I just completed a 2.5-hour training course on what is ranked choice voting. So looking forward to that conversation, as I find very relevant to this conversation, but we're going to handle it one thing at a time. And just for me, I'm a devil's advocate, and just to say that institutional history and knowledge is something that I value and treasure.
Okay, I'd like to add a couple other pieces of information too that I wanted to mention and did not. Somebody suggested that Don Allard had been on the council for more than 30 years. No, he was on the council for a total of 24 years. Lorraine Anderson was on the council for a total of 24 years. And Bob Free, who served as mayor in the 80s and 90s, and again from 2007 to 2011, was in the mayor's position or council, and for a part of that time, he was appointed by the other council members or elected by the other council members. But he served 20 years as mayor. But nobody has exceeded, nobody's gone above 30 years or above that 24. So just put that straight. So, and that's been the case of two people over a period of time who have been up at 24 years. And the mayor, when he completes a term, he will have been on council for 24 years. But that's 3 people in the last many, many years.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Mark.
Yeah, going back to 1958. So looking at all the incumbencies since that time, there's 3 people who have served for more than 20 years, but nobody more than 24.
So are they inspired, or are they insane, or are they just individuals who have just given? That's a long time to get elected is one thing, but to continue serving and going back over and over again, just saying, they might be losing it.
Well, that might be said much earlier than the term limits that are imposed currently. So it takes a certain amount of setting some things aside to enter into the arena and take the slings and arrows of both outrageous and good fortune. So, but our question is, and whether our current language does allow, that was adopted in 1991. Do we feel that do we want to make a recommendation to council to change the term limits in the way that's been suggested, so that the total amount of time, what is it, Nancy, 16 years? Is that what it was proposed, the total of?
Yes, 16 years per person. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So
okay.
Your proposal is that the term limits, that the language be modified so that whatever offices somebody might serve in, it could not exceed 16 years.
Yes, and that number was chosen for a reason. And the reason was exactly what several people have brought up, and that is experience in office. The first term is probably a very steep, almost vertical learning curve. But by the second term, and even at the end of the first term, people become very effective. And I've watched this now for well over a decade of people coming in and going off. And I find that, yes, there's a learning curve. The question is, how long should one viewpoint be on the council? And when you think about it, our council is only 7 people. And of that, 3 are elected at large. And at large is the most difficult seat of all because it's the entire city.
But Nancy, I think the lead into this was you were going to tell us why the 16 was chosen. Why
I chose the 16 as a compromise. That is, basically, it's one term to learn the ropes, so to speak, maybe a second full term in office, and then you can run for mayor for 2 full terms. 16 years is a very long time.
Okay, but
And of course,
you're saying that's a compromise between the possible 24, well, the usual.
Well, the possible lifetime.
The possible is 36, I guess, but we've never had anything over 24. So you're arriving at the 16 as a compromise in your thinking about what would be an acceptable limit.
Correct. If I had my druthers, I'd make it 12, period. But I would also like to address some of the other issues that came up. There were comments made about how elections are the ultimate term limiter. Well, there are a number of issues with elections. The first and foremost, which I've watched over the years, is incumbency. And the reason incumbency is so powerful is because an incumbent's name is seen all the time. It's heard all the time. It appears in every Arvada report. It appears, of course, in the city council proceedings. And name recognition is probably the number one way to get votes. The second aspect about long-term incumbency, as you get to know the ropes, you know how to pull the strings. And as you learn how to pull the strings, you meet people, and often you meet people with money. You have things in common. And if you start looking at where people get their money, invariably it's the incumbents who are getting very large donations from corporations. And that's perfectly legal. I'm not complaining about that, but I'm just saying that happens. And I, as a citizen, see that as a problem. So I think those two things, the experience issue, I think 16 years is a good compromise between that initial steep learning curve and then making a contribution. Then the last thing I want to say is maybe people are insane if they run for more than 4 terms. I don't know. Thank you.
Okay. Bob Dyer.
Thank you, Mark. I guess I'd like some clarification on the idea of 4 terms. First of all, I assume it is 4 consecutive terms, because I think that's what Nancy had said before, and then somebody could take a break and then they could run again. But I'm also thinking of the idea that, because we've talked about the idea of somebody moving from a district seat, for instance, and then becoming mayor. And districts, as I remember, 1 and 3, and then 1 of the at-large are in off times from the mayor. So somebody could be 2.5 terms in District 1 or District 3. So they've got 10 years, and then they would run for mayor, but that would mean they would be 1 term as mayor, because if they ran a second time, they would exceed 16 years. They would be at 18 years. So I'm not sure if there's a way to write it so that it says 4 full terms, or what's the best way to approach it. But as I remember, Nancy was saying 4 consecutive terms of 4 years would be 16 years, and then you could come back later and if you wanted to. So I just wanted clarification.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The original proposal was maximum 16 consecutive terms and then sit out at least 1 term, which would be 4 years before coming back.
Okay. is everybody seeing that point that Bob Dyer made? If somebody served 2 terms in a district seat, was elected for the 3rd term, but then ran for mayor halfway through that term, then how does it count? How does that 2.5 terms count toward the total of the 16 years? So good point, good point. That's, okay, so I think this again, I think we should consider in a 2-part thing. For the first question being whether we should change the term limit language currently in our charter, and if there's a feeling that that ought to happen, then we can take a look at the number of years or the number of terms, however that might be stated. But I think the first question is, are we satisfied with the language and the provision currently? If so, we won't have a further discussion on it. If not, then we need to discuss further. So, Lisa, can you get that question for us? Either maintain current term limit language or revise the term limit language.
I just dropped it in the chat. So to keep or change the language.
Yep. Keep or change.
It said, should we change the language in the charter? And that's regarding term limits. Yes or no?
Hold on, my computer failing me.
No pressure.
No, it's like, come on.
Okay, right now we have 9 and 4, so we have 13 in.
So 9 are saying maintain the current language?
No, it's the other way around saying, wait, hold on. What's the question? Should we change the language in the charter? 4 for yes, 9 for no.
Okay. Okay, so the sentiment of the group is to maintain the current language on term limits, not to recommend a change. Okay. Thank you. Let's move to an unnumbered item, and that is the creation of an office of Ombudsman. And this was brought up by Preston in the last meeting. And let's see, I guess we can move. Yeah, there we go. I like this term, the Office of Public Complaints.
I did too. It was one of the only charter provisions that I found like that. It's not necessarily uncommon to have one of these, but I thought that was an interesting way to phrase it. So I just put in some suggested language. Obviously, we can change it if people decide we want to recommend something like this. First of all, Preston, thank you. This was an incredibly interesting research project for me. I went and looked at a number of other cities and organizations that have something like this in place. And, you know, Preston, you can jump in after this and just kind of give your thought process and view on what you had kind of envisioned in making this request. Because one of the things that I found was these offices are very, very different depending on which city or organization they function in. So, but generally, like if you kind of boil it down, what they do is they try to help citizens resolve disputes with their government. And a lot of times that branches out into receiving and investigating and resolving like ethics complaints and things like that. So Preston, I'll hand it off to you and let you say anything else you want to about that idea.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for entertaining this discussion. So I guess maybe one of the ways that I would describe my thoughts to this point, and maybe kind of describing it from a resident's view, is kind of in the phrase, it would be someone on the inside that's on our side. And I think that it would be a role or a position where it would be a resource or an avenue that people could have assistance in navigating the system. And I think that we, as people who are on this group here, have a number of varying degrees of knowledge of that system, some for 20 and 30 years and some for shorter periods, but there's a lot of our residents that have no familiarity of that system. And so I think that it could be, like I say, kind of that resource, in some fashion, kind of a sounding board, maybe almost kind of a quasi advocate. Obviously, they wouldn't be representing that person, but they would be helping them to understand how to navigate the process or the processes of the city. And I think that that would be the flip side to that coin, is that they would also help that resident understand the city, what those processes are, the limitations, and they would be able to do so perceived from a little bit more of a neutral position than someone who is on the city council and their city council member. And I know that these city council members do great work and are very accessible to their residents, and to all residents, but they still vote at the end of the day. And I guess part of my thought on this kind of was because I think you might say that the political and the cultural climate of today is a bit toxic, and that this would be a resource or a way to try and help focus that and to maybe in some fashion, maybe proactively manage some of that. The reason that I think that it might be appropriate to be included in the city charter is so that that position does appear independent. It's not by ordinance that the city council would have ability to change or to pressure, wouldn't be subject, in some of the other fashions there from other city maybe influence. So, that's kind of the general, genesis of what I've been thinking about, and, certainly would say that it's a work in progress. But a few real brief items that I can try and address that I do think would be good clarifications or concerns that people might have. One is that it really is not something that's a focused idea because of a particular complaint. It's not saying that it's intended for specifically targeted towards the city council because of this issue or that issue or any other entity within the city. I don't necessarily think it would need to have and could maybe be in some fashion still effective if it doesn't have some of that investigative power, that ability to subpoena and so forth, because I do think that could be some degrees of concern about how that could be yielded. I guess those would be a few of the comments that I could maybe offer here to begin.
Okay, thank you, Preston. Okay, so open for other comments, thoughts.
Mark, one thing I forgot to add, I did add it to the worksheet, but I wanted to point out as part of the discussion, I talked a little bit with the city manager's office about this, and at this point, I think we would struggle to be able to appropriately plan and fund an entirely new office. I think it's a great idea, but it's just another piece to think about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Lisa, I think you had your hand up.
I did, but I didn't want to be aggressively holding it up, so I put it back down. Just one of the things, I've worked with ombudsmen with my social work hat on. I've worked with ombudsmen, and I think they're really, really great and a valuable asset to have. But I don't know if we're at the point where it should warrant being in a charter where it needs to be in there for the rest of its existence versus perhaps maybe an ordinance that would be a better route for this. Is just something to consider, maybe instead of it being in the charter, because I don't know how many city complaints we have, but does that warrant an ombudsman? For example, working in the nursing homes, we had countless complaints and we needed way more ombudsman, but does the city need that right now? And if so, maybe it should be an ordinance and not in the charter. Just some food for thought.
Okay, and Brett?
I have more of a question than anything else. I'm wondering, how do we handle complaints now? And what's the process for that? And how would that change under what Preston's put forth here?
So we have a number of different ways that we receive, concerns or complaints from the public. One of the major ones, though, that we use right now to resolve complaints is Ask Arvada. So when someone has a question or concern about something that is happening in the city, they can submit that via Ask Arvada, and then we route it to the appropriate department to troubleshoot and problem solve for that complaint. Some complaints are, at a higher level or larger than that, and we handle them a little bit differently. But for the most part, the average person can submit that Ask Arvada complaint or Ask Arvada request, and we will troubleshoot their complaint from there. I don't know, Lori, Barb, am I missing anything there?
No, I would just say, depending on how elevated or escalated the issue is and how specific it is, like there's certainly processes within the police department if there were any complaints. The Ask Arvada is, I would say, more general, and that's, I would say, more coming from there are traffic and potholes, as far as the familiarity. But that does also, complaints escalate if there's a concern, whether it's about a specific employee, that does go through a process and it is looked into. It's not something that is ignored. We follow through on all those, and we have a resolution captured in Ask Arvada, and or depending on who it is with, it's handled throughout the city within the department. So I would ask on this one, as far as I don't see things that aren't addressed, and I want to make sure that the conversation is around what we're trying to fix and have safeguards for. And I read Rachel's comment about what Fort Collins does related to DEI and where it is. And those are things that are current conversations are going to advance that thinking to make sure we do look at the depth we need to ensure we have things in place for that. But I agree with Rachel, it comes through Ask Arvada, but I would also say we get direct messages to council, we get to department heads, to the city manager, I get them, and they're followed up on, so.
Hey, Sharon Davis.
So first I want to say that I do agree with Lisa. I'm not sure this needs to be in the charter necessarily. I think this could be addressed in a different way. And but I do very much like this idea of an ombudsman. I've made inquiries to the city before and have been sent to different places, ending up where I started. And so one of the reasons why I say this can be a focus on the diversity, equity, and inclusivity was when I initially was in Arvada and had questions about the police and their contacts with me. How could I navigate that and have that addressed? And it really actually kind of went nowhere. So that's why I feel like if we had a one stop where somebody is listening to our concerns as Arvadans, and then can actually come to some sort of resolution, I think that's really important. However, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be in the charter.
John Marriott.
Yeah, I was just gonna weigh in with, and I think Lauren would agree with this too, your elected officials oftentimes act as ombudsmen at times. One of them, I'm very frequently contacted by people that have one issue or another, and they've gotten nowhere kind of through the channels, and we have the ability to bring things directly to the city management and even to the majority of council. Now, it doesn't mean people always get the result they're looking for. We as elected officials don't have power to do much as far as, we can't fix parking tickets, and we can't change water bills, and there's all kinds of things we can't do. But if it's as far as getting attention onto a problem, getting to the right spot, even if that means getting it to a political decision being made. I had one here just this year where I have a person in Arvada who thought that it would be really important if dogs have to be on leashes, so should cats be. And he has gotten nowhere with that over the years. And he brought that to me, and I was able to escalate that to the full council, where the full council made a decision whether they wanted to entertain that or not. In this particular case, they did not. So he didn't get the outcome that he wanted, but an ombudsman position couldn't have got him the outcome he wanted either. But it was able to get him to the right place. So I think we've got, some of what this position we've got that already in your elected officials. And my experience has been everyone I've ever been around as an elected official in Arvada, while I might not always agree with them, 100% of them have taken it seriously and have helped people navigate. So I look at it, I think it's possible, but I also think it's kind of a solution looking for a problem more so than a problem that we consistently have that this is a solution for.
Just to build on to John's comments, I absolutely agree. Us as council members often do serve that role. I certainly myself have had constituents come to me with issues where I have filled that role, and some haven't gotten the resolution they wanted, and some did. Like Ms. Gillis knows quite well, this past summer, we were able to get a cul-de-sac repaved after I went over there and picked up a slab of cement with my feet, and sent photos to the city manager and herself. And so it is an interesting thing that we do there. My concerns are more about the city resources. John and I actually serve on the city audit committee. We are the stewards of the city budget, and we keep a sharp eye on that. And the full-time resources required of creating an office. And to be very clear, I fully support the role and function of an ombudsman. But is this a solution looking for a problem? Are we going to have one or two questions going to this or responsibilities going to this person a month, and thus paying a full-time employee? And I really like where Sharon Davis and Lisa Smith were going with this idea about perhaps there's another way to do this. Perhaps do we look at a contract employee for when things get particularly sticky and need to be elevated to a negotiator, somebody who has that impartiality? Or perhaps with the upcoming DEI committee, for certain issues that would be related to them, do we resolve to maybe a 3 or 5 person committee? I don't know. These are merely ideas in my head at this time that we could potentially consider down the road. Is this something that belongs in the city charter is ultimately the question we're getting at right now. I'm reticent to create a position within the city charter that we must then fund for eternity. The ombudsman is a great idea. I feel very certain the voters would approve such a thing. And as a result of that, because of the surface idea of what an ombudsman represents, we then create that. Then we are in perpetuity having this position that must be resourced, et cetera, et cetera. Is this better solved in other ways, including perhaps a part-time or on contract basis person who can take those elevated cases as opposed to being on the payroll 12 months a year?
Okay. And Bob Dyer.
Thanks, Mark. I am not surprised by the response. It's something I expected. And when I served on council and got various different problems presented to me from constituents, I did my best to help them at least get connected to the right people at the city. Sometimes it isn't a matter of the council person solving the problem, but sometimes it's a matter of getting the channels of communication opened and try to resolve it through city channels. I did expect comments about, is there some other way? If if we feel that a city charter amendment is not the way, I guess I would suggest that we maybe not urge, but comment to the city council that they might think about asking if there would be community members who would be interested in putting together such a committee. Something that comes to my mind would be business community through the chamber. Service clubs could provide some civic leadership as well. Faith community as well might be able to help in some issues that the city can't handle per se, but maybe the faith community has already been stepping up and helping with that. So I could see by putting together a group like that we could at least see if there is such a problem that would require something more permanent, but at least some kind of mechanism that, if people don't have a council person that they feel listens to them, that there's some other mechanism that they could use to try to get heard about their problem, and maybe the resolution would be easier to come to.
Okay, we've got time for just one or two very quick comments if we're going to finish up at the designated time. So Vanessa, you're up.
My question was, who fields the Ask Arvada questions as of right now? And then I'll have a follow-up once I get an answer to that.
I'm sorry, your question was who fields the questions?
Right, we have the Ask Arvada platform. So who is the one answering those as of right now?
It's a system that actually, when you're checking what the question is about, it's dispersed to the places. And then if it's out there and it doesn't have that designation, it depends on what the question is. Even sometimes it does go to the city manager or myself.
Okay. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. My comment was going to be, or suggestion was going to be, if we rebranded that from Ask Arvada, because it sounds like we're getting some superficial things flowing through that. If we rebranded it to something a little bit more towards this ombudsman position, or talk to Arvada, or I'm not very good at branding in that sense, but such that concerns that would go to the Office of Complaints, if there was one, would go to this particular platform, and then we could through that assess the actual need to create this office, and then how much staff would be needed to man this office, et cetera, et cetera. If right now all we're getting are superficial stuff there, then I think we need to create a platform, even at the electronic level that we already have set up, but just brand it such that people know to go to it if there is an actual complaint or concern that they would like addressed further. And then we can decide how much staffing needs to be on such an office in the future.
Okay, Katie, you got the last comment on this, and then we're going to get to the polling. So go ahead.
Thank you so much. To dovetail onto what Vanessa said, I also feel that some people in our community, they like to ask a lot of questions like me, and I've been privy to not knowing what I don't know, and gotten long, wonderful emails, responses from Mark Devin, Lori Gillis, Rach. I mean, when I have a question and I'm unsure about something, or I don't know, and therein lies the fact of, do I believe what Mark Devin, Lori Gillis, and Rachel Morris are telling me? Do I trust them as city officials? Or am I looking for somebody to translate this for me? Make it make sense. Maybe you're right, John Marriott. Maybe we're just complaining another complaint department for the complaint department. When I'm mad I didn't get what I wanted from one, I'll go to another. But I think that there's a trust factor where we know our community sometimes some people in our community don't trust government at any level. And some people want to get an answer and say, okay, thank you. Now I get it. I understand. So I think there's value in this conversation about looking at not only Ask Arvada, but, Lori, for yourself and any other leadership, how much time do you spend fielding those calls and those, because I know I've gotten some of your wonderful emails and I've learned a lot. But, I think it might be interesting to have a point person that we could talk to. That might be something that could be interesting, and pooling all of those resources together from the hours a day that there's Ask Arvada and the city manager and all of this. So I don't know. And I could come up with a cool branding title for it because Ask Arvada, it could be different. That's all.
Okay. Okay, well, our question really is, shall we recommend the creation of charter language to establish the office of Ombudsman? And that's a yes or no question. So Lisa, if you can
Sure.
put that in
Do you
there.
want me to add a third of just needing more information? Because I know there's discussion about, does it need to be in a charter versus?
No,
Okay.
just shall we,
Nope.
do we recommend the creation of language to establish an ombudsman's office?
Okay. I'm on it. Hold,
Okay.
please. All right, I'm pasting it now. There you go.
Mark, Brett's asking if we could get the last item in tonight. Do you want to push it past 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock to do that?
That question will be coming up in just a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get our determination on this one.
So we're at about 79% no, that's 11 and 3.
Okay. So basically, we will not be recommending the creation of language to establish an office of ombudsman. Now to the question that Barb raised, which is the question, we have only one item left on our agenda, and but we have reached the 8 o'clock time. So the question really is, would you like to spend another several minutes and take a look at the issue of creating a ranked choice voting, or leave that till next meeting? And I'm certainly open to either one.
So I just did a poll.
Okay, yeah, we can do a poll. So extend the meeting, yes or no?
I'm having a hard time voting, but there is no way we're going to cover ranked choice voting in less than 45 minutes. I'm just giving everyone a heads up. It took me 2.5 hours to understand what it was, how it works, how cities fund it. It is, unless everybody already knows what it is going to take some onboarding to get comfortable. I think we need some materials, just an opinion, but I can't vote because my internet's like gone.
Well, we'll let you vote. We'll let you vote orally. That's okay.
I agree entirely with Katie. This is a massive issue. I was about to be all on board for let's plow through. And then the second Mark said it's ranked choice voting, I immediately changed my opinion. This is a subject that requires a great deal of attention and thought, that I feel like this is going to take a great deal of time. And if we want to go there, we'll go there. I'm with you guys all night, but just as a heads up, this is not one we're going to cover in a few minutes.
Mark,
yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I have a couple of families in from Anchorage that I really, I told them it'd only be 2 hours, and so I'd have to run. Yeah. But this is one of the things I brought up, and I would like to have a chance to participate in it. But I also would like to say that I don't feel we're finished with the thing with the ombudsman. I know we don't want to recommend it to change the charter, but I don't think we ever discussed whether we'd like to make a recommendation regarding some sort of effort to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Bob, because basically when I was looking ahead with this last item to take a look at the agenda for March 25, and perhaps it is best to just wait for the ranked choice voting, because I'd like to include the opportunity to discuss some of these points, to double back on some. As you say, with the other recommendations, there are things that we're not recommending to the council, like the ombudsman. We're not recommending the creation of charter language, but we would like to make a recommendation to the council. So it might be better to just plan for a meeting on March 25 be able to take a look at this ranked choice voting thoroughly, and then do a wrap up on what we want to present to the council. How does that sound to people? Would it be
Yeah.
okay?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. I'd actually feel more comfortable about that too. I think otherwise we're just ending very abruptly without the opportunity to discuss among ourselves and talk about the report to the council, because things like Bob just mentioned we may well want to include those. So let's do that. If unless somebody has a strong objection, let's declare this meeting adjourned and plan for one more on March 25 at 6 p.m. All set? Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the really good participation this evening. It's wonderful, and I think we're going to have a good product to present to the council. So good night, everyone. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. You guys were awesome.